Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is Movie Night. In times of political difficulty and uncertainty, especially with the overhanging danger of a massive war looming, it's a good idea to look back and see how earlier generations dealt with the same thing, and how many hoped beyond hope that the better angels of our nature would win out, and the world would become a more peaceful place. And this is especially interesting when you look to see how people dealt with such things in the world of entertainment. The movie I'm going to talk about came out in 1937, which is the year the Second World War really began, and that's when Japan invaded China. The movie is Lost Horizon, starring Ronald Colman and Jane Wyatt, and directed by Hollywood legend Frank Capra. This book is based on a novel that came out in 1933, back when people were hearing stories about Tibet and didn't really know much about it. The Himalayas were guarding a very mysterious part of the world. It was a much larger world back then. Many parts had not been explored. This was a book that captivated a lot of audiences, and of course, Hollywood being Hollywood, pounced on it to make a film about it. Now, Frank Capra was known for being quite a director, and this is a time when people were very concerned about looming war clouds of what would eventually be the Second World War. The movie starts off like you would expect, an action sequence when people are desperately trying to escape what is in the book India, but of course in the movie is China. There's a non-spoken about enemy that is attacking, obviously reference to the Japanese, showing a great deal of aggression in China at the time. And a plane load of the last people out, 5, are flown out just in the nick of time as machine guns are trying to take them down. A very classic Hollywood beginning. And then, of course, they go on to an adventure in a mysterious land known as Shangri-La. I won't spoil the story for you. Alls I'll say, it was beautifully photographed for the time. It was done in California, of course, but what is really a little disappointing about it is it was done in black and white. Capra originally wanted to do it in color, but there were 2 reasons they didn't do it in color. One is that it was very expensive, but the other was that there was no stock color film at the time that they would need to make the movie more accurate. It was all in black and white. There were no color films that had been done about the Himalayas or even that part of the world at that time, so they had to go to black and white. Rather sad, but that's the way it turned out. The movie is pretty interesting, especially with all the references to the way the world is going to hell, short-sightedness of politicians, people being slaughtered on a mass scale. Isn't it interesting how the more things change, the more they stay the same? And there's an awful lot of hope in it. This is the whole point about the story of Shangri-La, this idyllic utopia where everybody gets along, everybody is healthy, everyone lives very long lives in a magical sort of place. It's a dream world. And this is what kept the United States going, as well as Europe. Not the movie, but the feeling of the world becoming a better place. Jane Wyatt, you'd probably never heard of her, but she became a real mainstream actress in Hollywood, but also in television. And this is 1937. She went on to play the role of the mother of Spock in the Star Trek TV series in the 1960s, which I find rather interesting. She was very young and beautiful when this movie was done. The dialogue was excellent. But one of the sad things about this movie is that some of the footage is gone forever. It had vanished. It had just decayed. And there are scenes in the movie that you'll see that do not have film, but just have photographs of the actors taken from stills at the time when the scenes were done. They have the soundtrack, but they don't have all of the movie, which is sad. Originally, the movie was 6 hours long, the first cut of it. But of course, they wouldn't have had a movie that long back then because you had to show it several times in a theater to make money. But all of that footage apparently is just gone forever, and it's sad. But someday they'll have movies without Hollywood executives. They'll just make them for the sake of art. Still, it's worth watching. Most of the movie is there, and it is entertaining from a cinematic as well as a historic sense. Now, they actually did remake this movie, and there was a remake done in 1973 starring a very young and dashing Michael York and George Kennedy, who was a common actor at the time. And part of that movie was, it was almost as if they were using the same exact script. In fact, I compared both films, and that seemed to have been the case, except the one done in the 70s was in color and was more modern. They were escaping from somewhere in Southeast Asia to Hong Kong, which of course was reference to the mayhem going on as a result of the Vietnam War. But what made the movie awful was they made it into a musical. No, I'm not joking. Now, in the 60s and 70s, musical movies were very popular. The Sound of Music, 1776, which is a great musical movie, and Cabaret. But they thought if you just added a musical side to a movie, you'd make it good, but it basically made it ridiculous and almost impossible to watch. Thank goodness for the fast forward, because when they start singing, you want to whip that ahead. But you get to see what the movie from 1937 sort of would have looked like in color, and it was quite beautiful. Now, if there's a movie that needs to be remade properly, it's this one. Of course, I don't know if people in Hollywood are interested in making quality movies anymore. It's an entertaining movie, but it's also a good reflection on where the world was and where American society was and back in the days before World War II overtook us. What I do find rather ironic about this movie, though, is how it did play a role in World War II. When the United States launched what was called the Doolittle Raid, which was a squadron of bombers that took off from an American aircraft carrier very early in the war in 1942 and hit Tokyo and other cities in Japan as a way of really messing with the psyche of the Japanese, that it was not going to be an easy war for them. The Americans didn't want to say how they did that, so when reporters were asking President Roosevelt at the time, where did the bombers come from, he said they came from Shangri-La, in reference to the movie, which was quite popular when it came out. They didn't want to say what they were capable of doing, so he just pulled that out of his hat. They came from Shangri-La, this mysterious land in the Far East. And as the Americans are and were during World War II, well, they decided to name an aircraft carrier USS Shangri-La, which served during World War II and well into the Cold War. Kind of sad in a way, because Shangri-La was a place of peace and harmony and goodwill towards men, and the Americans named an aircraft carrier after it, which went on to fight and destroy things. But, well, that's the way of Hollywood and the United States. You can pay for it in some places, but you can find it around there. It's quite easy to locate. Lost Horizon, starring Ronald Colman and Jane Wyatt, directed by Frank Capra. It came out in 1937 by Columbia Pictures, based on the 1933 novel by James Hilton. And if you're into the musical version, which might be fun to watch, you can find one that came out in 1973, which is also out there, and it's usually pretty easy to find. It's probably free, because I don't think anyone would pay for it. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies, especially if they like fun old movies. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, don't forget the popcorn, and be sure to read all the credits at the end of the film. Good day.